Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Kristina Walter, Director of the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center at the National Security Agency. Kristina, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Justin. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. It's a really good time to have the Collaboration Center here. It's a really dynamic time, obviously, in the national cybersecurity conversation. There's an election coming up. There are these cyber threats to critical infrastructure that we're hearing about in the news every week, it seems. I'd love if you could just kind of explain the role of the Collaboration Center for folks who might not know, and then what you're seeing out there as far as the threat landscape and how you're tackling it.
Yeah, sure. So NSA Cybersecurity Collaboration Center is still fairly new in this space. We stood up about 4 years ago. And really, we did it in recognition that as NSA functions as part intelligence community, part combat support, we need to defend the defense industrial base just as much as we do defend DoD networks. And so the Collaboration Center was really stood up recognizing that privately owned networks are just as critical to warfighting capabilities. And if we're not partnering with those network owners and operators, we won't really fully understand the threat landscape. We have an aperture from targeting and tracking foreign adversaries, but we don't have any sort of visibility into US domestic space. And so the center was really stood up recognizing that in order to understand the threat fully, you have to connect those different puzzle pieces, and industry has a huge part of that. And so we wanted to be able to work together to understand the actors and tailor mitigation guidance that went out. I think when we talk about the environment that we're seeing over the last 4 years that we've existed, that partnership has been really critical to producing a lot of the public advisories that you're seeing coming out of the US government, because we've been able to identify how the PRC is leveraging US infrastructure to target our critical infrastructure, our defense industrial base, our critical companies, and really work together to get after that threat and try to mitigate that.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you don't have insights into what's happening in critical infrastructure or US critical infrastructure automatically. And I'd love if you could kind of explain what is the critical infrastructure, the types of companies that you're most concerned about at the Collaboration Center, and then how do you form those insights with them? How are you able to gain those insights in the absence of, authorities to just watch what's happening on their networks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in the Collaboration Center, our focus is the defense industrial base. So, those companies providing support to our military, but we really look at it from the entire ecosystem of the defense industrial base. So, we can partner with internet service providers, cloud providers, cybersecurity companies, endpoint detection companies, those large defense contractors that are providing military support to the DoD. But we also think of the defense industrial base as really hundreds of thousands of companies. When you look at the supply chain of some of our weapon systems, there's thousands of companies involved in that. And so our approach has been really robust analytic collaboration with those big companies that have cybersecurity teams, and then how can we offer additional support to the small businesses. But on the question of how we're partnering together to really understand the threat, these companies have big cybersecurity teams that are also tracking, nation state actors that are targeting their networks. They're the ones experiencing it every day. And so we really get our teams together who understand the plans and intentions of malicious cyber actors with the net defenders in industry. And we can share information out that says, here are the tactics and techniques that this actor uses to defend against it. And then they can come back in and see, this is practically how we saw them targeting our network. Here's how we can tailor this mitigation guidance to be more relevant based off what we're seeing. They're the ones experiencing password spraying, attempts to exploit unpatched systems. And so they have a really good vantage point of the tactics and techniques they see, and they share that information back with us so that we can really understand holistically the threat.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you're looking at the types of companies you work with, you mentioned it's kind of this mix of big companies that have the cybersecurity teams and then perhaps some smaller companies. And, if you look across the defense industrial base, you mentioned hundreds of thousands of companies. And I think a lot of those are those smaller and medium-sized businesses that don't have those big cybersecurity teams. So how are you able to connect with those companies, to work with them, to better get them to better understand, here's what's good cybersecurity, here's how you might be being targeted. How is that going 4 years in?
Yeah, I'll say, we really how do we get to scale? We have two approaches. The first one we've talked about a little bit. If we can share a malware sample with a cybersecurity company that builds detection signatures, they can defend against it at scale for critical infrastructure for the defense industrial base. If we share, infrastructure that's being used by a malicious actor with an internet service provider, they could null route traffic to and from it. And that really defends those small businesses without them even noticing. So that's one of the angles is, we work with those companies higher up in the ecosystem who can take action at scale. But when we talk about those small businesses, we are working a lot with the Department of Defense to provide free cybersecurity services to those companies. So what our approach was looking at what are the most common attack vectors we see actors using when they target small businesses. Going after unpatched systems, using DNS to reroute traffic to known malicious websites and delivering malware or command and control of malware through DNS. And we offer services that are commercial that DoD gave us funding for to any company that has a DoD contract. So we go out to supplier forums, we work with the big DIB primes to engage with their critical suppliers, and then we offer these DoD funded services to them. So protective domain name system service is one. So we know that actors use DNS, essentially the phone book of the internet that's not inherently built securely. Actors can hijack that DNS action to bring them to a known malicious site and deliver malware. What protective DNS does is it leverages a cyber threat feed that if a domain is bad, www.badguy.com is not somewhere you want to let your folks go, it will block that. On the back end, NSA is feeding in non-public domains that we know are bad from our foreign intelligence aperture. This helps to make that service more robust for those companies enrolled without ever having to talk to the company and letting them know that that's a bad domain. And so that's what we have found is we can enrich the services with what we know for these small businesses. So protective DNS is one that's available. Attack surface management is another, helping a company understand what of my assets is facing the internet? What versions am I running of that? This is much like how these actors are targeting your networks. They use commercial tools to scan the internet and find out what version are you running? Is that vulnerable? Can I exploit it? Our job is to help a company understand that before it gets targeted and help them patch it and address it beforehand. So those are two of the services. Threat intelligence collaboration is a third, where we just allow the companies to share information with us. If they get a suspicious email that they're not sure about, if something is happening on their network that seems odd, they can come in and ask our experts, and we can share information with them about how to better secure their networks. So that's our approach to the small businesses, is working with the department and with DIB primes to make sure their critical suppliers know about these resources that are available to them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and then in terms of those services that you mentioned, I don't know, can you quantify the kind of uptick that you've seen on those across the DIB?
Yeah, we have in the last 2 years moved from about 100 companies enrolled to over 1,200. So we have seen a huge increase in folks taking advantage of this program that's available. And just as far as kind of metrics of what the program has delivered, over the last 2 years, we have had 4 billion malicious domains blocked for the companies that are enrolled. 70 million of those are unique to NSA information that was fed into the service to increase the blocking. Hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities have been identified for companies, leading to mitigations. So we're really excited about seeing just the progress in the companies enrolling in the services, and also what we can see on the back end as far as the effectiveness of the programs.
All right, yeah, that's pretty market expansion. And then if you're in the DIB, you've probably heard of the term cybersecurity maturity model certification. And if you haven't, you probably should have heard the CMMC term by now, because it's looking like that rule is going to be finalized. Those rules are going to be finalized and implemented as soon as next year. Obviously, you're providing some cybersecurity services to the DIB. Are you looking to have the collaboration center's tools or services in any way kind of mesh with those those CMMC requirements that companies will have to implement over the coming years?
Yeah, we are working with the department on that. So CMMC is really based off of NIST 800-171, and there's 100 plus internal controls in there. So we don't satisfy all of them, but some of those controls are DNS filtering, scanning of your perimeter network, addressing unpatched systems, enrolling in cyber threat programs. So we do help companies to achieve some of the pathway to CMMC, and we are working with the department and their certification arm to make sure that if companies are enrolled in the service, they can get credit for that when they're pursuing their certification.
When you're talking about the threats to the defense industrial base, you mentioned how um, they're being targeted in some ways, but in terms of both how and why they're being targeted, are we seeing any change in kind of the strategic picture? Is it still primarily industrial espionage and IP theft? Is it changing at all from that?
I think what we've seen in the last year related to the Volt Typhoon activity that's been fairly public is we see the targeting for intellectual property theft and intelligence gains continuing. I think the alarming change when it came to Volt Typhoon is we also saw an attempt to pre-position in critical infrastructure for destructive purposes to really sow discord if needed, if and when needed. And so we see a combination of both. I think we still see the common attack vectors being taken advantage of, unpatched systems, looking for the weakest link in the supply chain. One of the things that I think we find is, because we are very public about who wins contracts, what they're supporting, all of that information is publicly available, and so it's fairly easy to tell who's providing support for specific programs. I think we're in the same space with AI. We've always seen an interest in emerging technologies, and the theft of intellectual property for their own economic and technological gains is still a priority of our nation state actors, and they're going to use the pedestrian techniques if those work, but they also have a large force that's coming after us looking for zero-day vulnerabilities, trying to target for the more exclusive information where they can. So I think we see the combination of both in the activity.
Right. And the Collaboration Center kind of runs the gamut of looking for those zero-day kind of exotic type attacks versus the basic attacks too, right?
Yeah, and I think what we found is, so we do, vulnerability research at the National Security Agency. We've identified vulnerabilities in products that we've released to companies so that they could address vulnerabilities that we find. But one of the other things that we have found is through our ongoing collaboration with industry, specifically if we talk about the PRC and the way that they've been able to use US infrastructure, they build these big networks, obfuscation networks is what we call them, where they're compromising small at home devices, Internet of Things, and then they're targeting from those devices. They build out these giant networks. And through the tracking of those networks, we're able to see where they're targeting perimeter devices, looking for vulnerabilities, or that's how we've discovered some zero-day vulnerabilities in the past, is because by tracking the networks that they're using to attack from, you can then see from there the connection to the devices and the device types that they're going after.
Yeah, and just to follow on that, I think the NSA recently warned about a China-linked botnet that was taking advantage of some of those smaller devices. What can be done about that? What should folks who are perhaps still running these devices know about kind of that threat and how to address it?
Yeah. So, yeah, we just released a public cybersecurity advisory in coordination with our FBI colleagues and our interagency partners, as well as our Five Eye partners, that warned about the fact that the PRC is taking advantage of these unpatched systems, these unsecure systems to target from them. And so, basic cyber hygiene helps that. We're obviously working with our interagency partners, and you saw in some of that coverage that FBI has taken action against them to try to mitigate that threat. But it is important for people to follow the basic cyber hygiene so that their small at home router is not being used as part of these networks, because that is essentially the weakest link in the internet ecosystem that they're taking advantage of.
Yeah, I'm sure many smaller businesses are using these similar type routers, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And then in terms of, you mentioned how Vault Typhoon has kind of marked this shift from perhaps just espionage to potential disruption within critical infrastructure. And I'm curious whether, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the defense industrial base has been a major target where ransomware has been successful to date, but that's been used to disrupt many other critical industries. Do you see that becoming more of a threat potentially?
Yeah, I think what's interesting that we've seen with the ransomware actors is them going after those critical suppliers, even in the defense industrial base. Over the last several years, we've seen that there could be financial gain by shutting down production systems, whether it's for military support or a pipeline. And so we do see them going after critical suppliers in the defense industrial base from a ransomware perspective. Uniquely, we've also seen them try to do that to get financial gain from the prime who's critical. So even if the small business can't pay, can they hold that information hostage from essentially stakeholders who have information on the networks? And so it is a problem that I think is also impacting the defense industrial base. It is a market and an ecosystem that is really hard to track the profitability of ransomware actors. We're seeing a lot of ransomware as a service actors come in. And so I think it is a problem in the defense industrial base just as much as it is broader critical infrastructure that we're all trying to get around with, again, reemphasizing the basic cyber hygiene. Multi-factor authentication is a big one that could prevent a lot of these more pedestrian activities that we see these cyber criminals engaging in.
Okay, well, and this has been a great discussion about the threat landscape. I'd be remiss though if we didn't take a step back and mention, I think you just came into the director job a few months ago. You've been at the Collaboration Center previously before going over to the NSA to work on human capital issues and now coming back to lead the center. Is there anything that we should know just about your priorities as the new director, how you want to see things evolve or even change potentially?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will start with some reflections from the time I was away. I was here when the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center stood up in 2020, and then went over to run the Future Ready Workforce Initiative for about 18 months, really to try to revolutionize some of our human capital management processes. And while I was away, we talked a little bit about this, but the growth that has happened has been immense. Moving from a couple hundred partners to over 1,000 was significant growth that we experienced. As far as the number, but the second angle was our scope. And so we stood up the AI Security Center in that time, almost a year ago now. And so taking on that, how do we take the goodness of the Collaboration Center and apply it to a specific technology has been one of the main focuses for me. And so I'd say as far as priorities, one, we continue to want to operationalize intelligence to enable industry partners to identify, disrupt, and defend against nation state actors. So we want to make sure that they can outmaneuver these actors who are constantly targeting their networks. I'd say two, securing emerging technologies. So we want to make sure that our work with international standards bodies and in coordination with NIST, that we're sending our technical experts to make sure that emerging technologies are secure from a standards perspective. When we look at internet protocols, we look at 5G, we look at AI, we want to be forward leaning in that space as the space is evolving so quickly. And finally, we want to build a cadre of experts in this field, working with industry partners, understanding what they have to bring to this space, and building a cadre of folks who can navigate that space to make sure that we're staying on the cutting edge from a cybersecurity perspective are my top three priorities as I enter into this role, I guess 3 months in. So.
Got it. All right. And yeah, I think we wanted to talk about this, so I'll bring it up now since you mentioned that the AI Security Center is a relatively new development at the Collaboration Center. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like and what kind of collaboration you've done, perhaps across government and industry so far.
Yeah, so the AI Security Center is embedded within the Collaboration Center. So it's about a year old, and it was really designed to take the goodness that we had from a cybersecurity perspective, but also bring in the years of research experience that we have looking at how to use AI, how AI could be used maliciously, and make sure that we get that information out. So there's really three goals of the AI Security Center. The first one is to detect and counter threats. So just like we've done from a cybersecurity perspective, what do we know nation state actors or all malicious actors are wanting to do using AI, targeting AI, using Western AI for their own gains, or stealing that intellectual property to build their own indigenous AI? So detecting and counter that threat. Second, partner with industry, looking at the big frontier companies who we can feed information so that they can really defend at scale, as well as academia is really forward leaning in this space. So how do we leverage what academia is doing to make sure that we're tracking the latest threats and the mitigations? And that final one is that mitigation, publish mitigation guidance out at the unclassified level. That is always our goal so that everybody can action the information, regardless of sector that you're in. So we work as much as possible to put out public cybersecurity advisories, The AI Security Center did publish a Deploying AI Securely cybersecurity advisory that's available on NSA.gov, and working with our Five Eye counterparts, as well as the additional players in the US government. So we're engaging with the AI Safety Institute under the Department of Commerce to make sure that all of our roles and responsibilities when it comes to securing AI, NSA is really focused on the cybersecurity aspect of AI security, looking for cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and making sure that it's being used securely in the defense industrial base and national security systems. So that's really what they're focused on.
Got it. Yeah, in terms of threats to AI, I'm sure the NSA is in one of the best positions to understand how foreign adversaries are potentially targeting AI. You mentioned the different classes of threats, but are you seeing anything particularly concerning recently regarding how perhaps the AI models that we're seeing deployed across industry are being either targeted or misused from the outside in?
Yeah, I think, we've always seen the adversaries wanting to go after intellectual property. And so I think the traditional, targeting of networks of the companies who are building these capabilities is always something that we know is happening and we'll make sure to share. I think one of the other things we've seen is just in the way the rapid evolution of AI has enabled the everyday lives of you and I, it's also enabling actors. So you think of how easy it was or used to be to detect a deep fake before. You could tell that it was not real. You could tell that the video was augmented in some way. They'd be missing fingers or something would look weird about it. With how available it is to everybody, that's becoming harder. One of the other things is you think of phishing emails, and you used to be able to detect that a phishing email was worded kind of funny. It wasn't in a normal tone. That is super useful for actors to use these generative AI tools to sound like you and I. They can sound like another person, and not be as easy to detect. And so that's our concern with how available these tools are. All of the activities that actors do, looking for unpatched systems, sending phishing emails, this just enables them to do it all a little bit faster. And so that's our biggest concern. We see actors trying to generate content on some of these generative AI tools. We can share that with the provider so that they can remove them from their platform. You're seeing these companies say that they are watching different actors trying to meddle with using their tools. So those are all the things that we're collectively tracking as an industry and government to try to defend against it.
All right, well, we're going to take a pause here to get an industry perspective, but we'll pick up the conversation with Kristina Walter, Director of the NSA's Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, after the break.